But before I get into it, I wanted to quote Francis Schaeffer that in his book. He had a book, The God Who Was There, and he kind of talks a lot about evangelism and apologetics, but I think he really hits an important point in how we view the person that we're talking to. Some of these things I don't agree with completely, but I like the thrust of his quote. He says, "If we are truly personal as created by God, then each individual will differ from everyone else." He's talking about people that we engage in conversations. "Therefore, each person must be dealt with as an individual, not as a case or a statistic or a machine. He has great value, and our communication to him must be in genuine love. Love is not an easy thing. It is not just an emotional urge, but an attempt to move over any sin in the person's place and see how his problems look to him. Love is a genuine concern for the individual as ourselves. This is the place to begin. Therefore, to be engaged in a personal witness as a duty or because our Christian circle exerts a social pressure on us is to miss the whole point. The reason we do it is that the person before us is an image bearer of God, and he is an individual who is unique in the world, and this kind of communication is not cheap." And I do agree that is part of the reason, that that person is unique, and God created that person different than the last person you talked to, and we must approach everybody like that. We don't approach them kind of everybody the same way. It's the same message, but we're talking to them as an individual, as a soul, as a human being who has a background, who has a set of beliefs, and we're looking at them as we view ourselves, and we try to put ourselves in their place when we talk to them. And because a lot of times, this happens to me a lot, we get information at church, we get information from classes, and then we think, okay, I'm taking this in, and my job is just to go spew it out to another person, and that's it, and take them through what I learned and leave it at that. But in reality, our motives we should be motivated by a love for that person. We should be motivated by a love for God, and that's going to look different in every conversation. And sometimes we kind of have a script that we go by, and we use that script to approach every single person, when in reality, sometimes we could be talking over them. They have no idea what we're saying. So that brings me to my first point, opening the conversation. And I think this is the hardest part, at least for me it is, actually engaging the person, going up to someone you've never talked to, going up to someone that you have no idea where they're coming from, and actually talking to them, either, hey, how are you doing, or talking to them about spiritual things. But I think as we examine the scriptures, we must take that initiative, to approach people. Jesus called the apostles fishers of men, and if you understand fishermen, they go out to the sea and they cast their nets to bring fish in. They don't wait for the fish to jump in the boat. They don't wait, or in other words, we can't wait for people to come to us and expect somehow that's evangelism. I mean, those things happen, but we must take the initiative in approaching people and bringing up these conversations, and not waiting for them either to come to church, not waiting for them to come to us and ask us questions, but actually going out and doing what Jesus commanded us to do, is to go and preach the gospel. It's an action that we must take. And like Francis Schaeffer is saying, it's not cheap. It can be difficult sometimes. It can take work in our own hearts to be able to do that, and to be able to look beyond the person and look beyond their appearance and be willing to talk to them about the gospel. But I think first and foremost, we must be normal, be ourselves, approach that person out of our own personality, and not try to be someone we're not. And I think I gave this example last time, but sometimes when we think too much about the conversation, we think too much about approaching that person and what we're going to say, we come up to them and we look very uncomfortable, we sound very nervous, and those things are okay, but ultimately we want the Spirit to work in our hearts, so that when we approach them, they see a love that we have for Christ, they see a love that we have for them, for that person. And that's going to take work, and that's going to take prayer, and that's going to take discipline. And I think our focus should be on those things, that we're genuine, we love that person, and we're genuinely concerned about that person. Because sometimes we have this kind of imagination that runs wild, where we think that person's going to somehow yell at us, cuss us out, or do something to us, when in reality, it's just in our heads. If we just approach that person, take the time to talk to them, we'll see that a lot of people, they're willing to have conversations. And sometimes they're even thankful for you that you're able to share these things with them, because nobody else took the time to do that. have an example of that in the jail ministry with Roger, when we go and we hold a chapel service, and after we share a message, we take some time to sit down and talk with the inmates, kind of see what's going on in their lives and pray for them. Well, there was a 19-year-old kid who came up to us after everybody left, and he was crying, he was weeping. He said he's never heard the gospel, and he wanted us to pray for him after he shared a bunch of stuff with us. And after we prayed with him, he said that in his entire 19 years, I mean, I don't know how true this is, that no one's ever taken the time to sit with them and pray with them. That he's never had that. He's never had anybody do that for him. So he was very thankful that the guys from Founders came and actually took time to sit with them. And that was very heartbreaking to me to think, a lot of times because either we grew up in the church or because we're involved in church, we kind of take that for granted, but we realize that there's a lot of people out there that, one, never even heard the gospel. I mean, they don't even know what the gospel is. No one ever actually took the time to sit with them. So I think we should approach people in that way, as if it's, we approach every conversation as if they have no idea what the gospel is, and as if they never heard it. And we view them like that. We care about them, we're concerned for them. I would encourage you to find a place in your neighborhood, maybe like a park or somewhere where people gather, to where you can, even if it's just going out there and talking to people, hey, how's your day going? Hey, how are you doing today? And that could be just a start for you, and seeing where that leads, and just being, being kind and being compassionate towards people, and just seeing how they're doing. Using tracts even. Tracts are very helpful. That's probably been the most beneficial thing for me. If you always have a tract on you, always have a Bible on you, always being ready for a witnessing encounter. And tracts kind of are a good icebreaker, because the person's ultimately going to ask, what is this? Or what is this about? And the tract kind of can do the talking for you, where it opens up kind of that spiritual conversation. But Jesus, I think, and I may have heard this before, but like at the woman at the well, he didn't come right up to her though and just start talking to her about himself. He actually asked her for a glass of water. So he kind of started just with an everyday natural thing, hey, do you have a glass of water? And then ultimately he swung it to the spiritual nature and started talking to her about her sin and talking to her about himself. So sometimes it just takes opening up a natural conversation, an everyday thing, and then maybe using a tract to kind of open up a spiritual conversation. And starting with questions, questions, there's a lot of good study material out there that talk about using questions to kind of evangelize to someone and to open up conversations to where it can open the door to engage the person into those conversations about the gospel. And some of the ones that we use, that are very familiar, what do you think happens when someone dies? You probably you don't want to use that right away when you walk up to someone, because they're going to think you're kind of crazy or you're going to do something to them. But, and I've had that happen to me before, where people kind of get really weird about it. But sometimes I'd ask, what church do you attend, or did you grow up in church? Those kind of things, and it kind of gets them talking, and you can kind of get an idea of where they're coming from. I know when we're in the Galleria, sometimes we go into the Galleria at that skating rink, we can't use tracts, and we'll let them know, hey, we're with the church, and we're just asking people spiritual questions, things about God, things about the afterlife, and that's kind of been very effective, because people love really talking about themselves, and kind of they like to share with you what they believe, and that can kind of lead to other things. So questions are always good to begin with. Do you believe in God? What do you think happens when someone dies? What church do you attend? Do you have a religious background? And then the other thing too is that door opening as you ask those questions, because sometimes we can try so hard to want to talk to that person and witness to them, to where maybe they don't want to talk, or maybe God isn't really opening that door in the conversation, but we keep on, we continue trying to engage them in a witnessing conversation. I've seen that happen when we go out, to where people kind of are shutting the door and they just don't want to talk about it, and some of the guys kind of want to chase them down and keep walking with them, to where they get really angry. But if you think about the Jesus and the rich young ruler, he let him walk away. He didn't. The rich young ruler walked away not even hearing the gospel. Christ just let him go. He didn't continue chasing after him. But in other words, we understand that God is sovereign over over whether that person is going to even hear that message or not. And we trust in the sovereignty of God. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say another question that I haven't used, but I've heard of, and I thought was a pretty good one, is have you found yourself more interested in spiritual things lately? Now, most of them may say no, but the few that say yes, these guys have been specifically preparing those.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a good way to gauge the
Thinking more about
conversation.
spiritual things like
And so ultimately, though, we rely on God to really open up the doors for us in those conversations. But we take that initiative as Christians, and we understand that there's a lot of people in Houston, a lot of people in the city, either that have never heard the gospel, or two, people that attend church that have a wrong view of it. And that's the opportunity for us to go alongside them and take some time to share the message with them. So really opening the conversation, just be normal, be yourself, talk about everyday things. I mean, ask questions, have tracts to pass out. We have tracts here that the church provides, or even CDs, I mean, from the pastor. We've used a lot of those to kind of talk to people, passing out CDs. And then really just trusting God to open up the door to that conversation.